Hello, everyone. Welcome. Hi, Lizzie. I see people are still streaming in. Gonna give everyone a minute. Welcome to our author talk tonight. We're so excited to be here with, there she is, Gina Siciliano, which your last name brings me great joy, by the way. I don't know if we've discussed this, but my grandparents are from Sicily, so I love it. Oh, give me 1 second here. Hi, Lizzie from Amherst. Someone is saying hello to you in the chat. Yeah, everyone say hi in the chat.
Hi, right back, Jenny Calic.
That would be great. So before we begin, I am going to do a land acknowledgement. The Frick Pittsburgh occupies ancestral lands of the Haudenosaunee, Lenape, Osage, and Shawnee peoples. As a place of history and nature, the Frick recognizes the cultural importance of land and the role of cultural institutions in the formation of collective memory. Displacement and erasure are not just histories for Native peoples. Land acknowledgements, like historic sites themselves, are exercises in preservation and reconciliation engaged with past, present, and future. So just a few logistics before we get started with this great program. You are welcome to put your comments in the chat, as many of you have started doing. Thank you for that. And I see some excited people here. And we're going to have a Q&A at the end of the program. So you're welcome to throw your questions, comments in the Q&A as well. And I will be here monitoring. And so will my colleague, Amanda Gillen. Hi, Amanda Gillen in the background. So anything you need, we're here to help you. So again, thank you for being here. We're really excited about our current exhibition that's in our galleries at the Frick Art Museum, Slay, Artemisia, Gentileschi, and Kehinde Wiley. And we're just glad that you're here tonight with us and hope that you'll come to the galleries to see. It's imposing in the best way possible, to walk around the corner and see these two pieces in conversation with one another. And the exhibition is possible thanks to the Capo di Monte Museum in Naples, Italy, the North Carolina Museum of Art in Raleigh, North Carolina, and the Museum Box, as well as the Frick Pittsburgh. And I want to thank Gina for being here tonight. We're so happy to have you all the way from Seattle. She's joining us. She is here to discuss her graphic novel, I Know What I Am, The Life and Times of Artemisia Gentileschi. And thank you to Lizzie Barker. There's the beautiful book, which you can buy in our museum store. And Lizzie is here joining her for really an exploration of her 7-year journey to bring this story to life. And I have been in conversations with the two of them, and I mean, it's just good. So you're lucky to be here, everyone, and I'm lucky to be here again. So I will just quickly introduce Eugenia. She's an artist, a bookseller, and a musician as well. She may or may not be in some rock bands. I had to say it. It's just too cool not to say, Gina. I had to. And she self-published her comics for many years, but I Know What I Am is her first book published by Fantagraphics. And again, she's coming to us from the Northwest. And here to have a conversation with her is Lizzie Barker, and I will turn it over to you, Lizzie. Thank you so much to both of you.
Thank you, Lisa, for the intro. And Gina, thank you so much for joining us this evening. Lisa, I think we have some slides to accompany our conversation. And since we have so much to get to, let's jump right in. Gina, could you speak to everyone who's participating in this call a little bit about your journey as an artist? How did you come to the graphic novel as an art form?
Yeah, I've been drawing comics my whole life. I've been doing words and pictures forever. It's a medium that feels very comfortable for me, very natural for me. It's definitely the medium I'm just most comfortable with at this point. It's kind of my safe space, my happy space. And comics are just perfect for making history a little bit more accessible. You can kind of speak in two languages at once with comics. You've got the language and the words and the literary part, and then there's the art and the visual component. So there's things that you can best explain with the art, there's things that you can best explain with the writing, and it's magical. And then also the main goal of this project was really to put Artemisia in the context of her time and place. And with comics, you can actually see that on the page. You can see the painting, and then on the same page, you can get a feel for what was happening in the artist's personal life, and also just the social political world of that life. And you can see it all on the same page when you're looking. So you're literally able to put an artist into the context of what was going on around them so wonderfully with comics.
It's so true. And you've done an extraordinary job immersing us into this world. I thought I had studied Artemisia Gentileschi before, and I learned so much from your book. This isn't an obvious subject. How did you come to discover this remarkable artist and choose to make this such a significant endeavor?
Well, I first discovered Artemisia in art school. I went to Pacific Northwest College of Art in Portland. And I first saw the Judith Slang Holofernes painting there. That was about 2006, 2007, and was just immediately blown away by it. There's nothing like it in the Western art canon. There's nothing like that painting. It struck me immediately. And then I got to see the later version, the Uffizi version of the Artemisia's later version of Judith slaying Holofernes in the Uffizi, and was blown away by that rendition of the painting as well over there. And I was doing a lot of like feminist research and writing, but then also still really loved kind of the old master, world and the fine art world. I studied oil painting. So thinking about Artemisia seemed like the perfect way to sort of bridge those two worlds, sort of the feminist component and the sort of like old school, more traditional fine art world. There's a lot of material about Artemisia. There's a lot of books about her. There's a lot of novels about her. There's a movie. There's a French movie about her. There's a play. There's plays about her. There's a young adult novel about her. But my approach was just really different. I didn't want to use Artemisia's life and history as sort of a jumping off point for my own expression. Like, I wanted to actually figure out what happened to her. Like, I wanted to actually take a deep dive and really get in there, and really try to put her into her own context rather than just kind of projecting my more contemporary views onto her.
I think it really comes through in the finished product. It's just an exceptionally thoughtful book. Am I right in remembering, Gina, that you spent 7 years researching this?
Yeah, I did. So the basic timeline was I spent the first year like just reading books about the time period, just trying to explore the Italian Baroque. And then I did the first two parts, and the first two parts feature the beginning of Artemisia's life and sort of her foundation. The middle part, the second part, deals with this 8-month-long rape trial, which we'll talk about more too. So I did those first two parts, and those two parts mostly take place in Rome. And then I self-published those. I was looking for a publisher and sending them out, and no one wanted it, and no one wanted it, and no one wanted it, and no one wanted it. You other creative types, you know how this goes, submitting the work and getting nothing. And then for the third part, I took another year off to just do research, and I got a library card at the University of Washington here. And it turns out you can access the library without being a student. So I did that for a year because the third part of the book deals with the rest of Artemisia's life, where she traveled to Florence and spent a time there. And then she did a brief time in Venice. And then went down to Naples, and then went up to London for a very brief period, and then went back to Naples. So in order to get a feel for all those different places, I really had to do another big stint of research with that University of Washington Library card to piece together that third part. And then finally, Fantagraphics came on board. And then when they finally got on board, then it took a last year of production work just to get this enormous pile of paper into a beautiful book. So the production was a huge part of it as well. And, you know, I dedicated myself to this research because in order to really recreate this world, you have to know it. In order to draw it and to write about it, you really have to know that world. So there's a big notes section in the back of the book as well. And that's so that readers can kind of track what I made up and what I actually used documentary sources for. And so that's why there's a difference in the lowercase and the capital letters.
I love that. It's so helpful for the reader.
Yeah, I really wanted readers to just get a window into what this kind of research looks like. And also, I wanted readers to understand that behind the scenes, there's huge controversy over Artemisia. All these scholars are just in this constant debate about the paintings, the provenance of the paintings, what they mean, when they were discovered. There's radiography that changes everything. So I wanted to give readers a feel for just this kind of ongoing scholarly debate about the paintings and Artemisia's life and her time as well.
And you have this really elegant solution that we were just alluding to, where everything that's cited from a primary source. So, for example, if you're quoting the transcript of the court trial, or you're quoting a letter, you put that original verbiage in lowercase letters, and it just fits in seamlessly with your text.
Right.
So your words as the narrator are uppercase, and her words are right there alongside them.
Yeah, so you can see what's me talking for these people versus the actual records of their actual words. Yeah. So, and again, I feel like a lot of this too is just to try to get to like the complexity and the nuance of it. And, you know, in hindsight, we're really living in this world of like quick, fast trivia information, you know, but I really wanted to just, kind of get away from that and really do a deep dive into something. And because there's a lot of rewards for again, just looking into that complexity and not wanting to just, sort of relax into like the stereotypes of artists and the stereotypes of survivors and perpetrators, and really just get into some of that complexity. And that 7-year journey really changed me and changed who I am, changed who I see, how I see the world and how I see everything, just being deep in Artemisia's world for that long. And it's just a really epic time period. Artemisia was doing, Artemisia was doing this work, during the Counter-Reformation, when the Catholic Church was really trying to prove themselves and defend themselves against the Northern Reformation. Artemisia was doing this work during the 30 Years' War. There was a giant war between Protestant and Catholic forces going on, and the world was sort of shifting, towards the Enlightenment. It's also obviously, the time period when there were huge colonial and imperial projects going on, has been a big part of the discussion. So it's big, it's complicated.
Absolutely. Oh, thank you for moving ahead, Lisa. So for a few minutes, we were looking at a slide that reproduces your wonderful self-portrait from the back of the book. And now we're looking at this extraordinary full-page illustration that shows Artemisia as a young artist, incredibly determined. Could you share with us what you were thinking of as you were developing this image? I'm really struck by these incredible, are they torchères that are the motif in the borders?
Well, so this is one of our first glimpses of the young Artemisia in the book. And this was a drawing that I did when I was younger and in the early stages of the book.
Mm.
So it's where I was at the beginning of this project, and it's where Artemisia was at in the beginning of her career. And this was just an incredibly dangerous and misogynist and intense world. I talked about some of the larger social political things were happening in the world, but also, Artemisia at this point, this would be a portrait of her toward the beginning of the book, the beginning of her career, which is also when this first version of Judith slaying Holofernes was painted as well. So, we're thinking about a teenager that is mostly surrounded by men. She was trained by her father and had 3 brothers, and her mother died when she was 12. So Artemisia was really up against a lot. So this is, just trying to imagine the strength of will that it would take for her to follow her father's teaching and decide to be a painter. And this is also a world where, there's no electricity. Nighttime is pitch black. You're not out at night unless you're up to no good. People slaughtered their own animals. People died really easily. Life expectancy was a lot shorter, lower. The people witnessed public executions. I mean, this is a world where, people just died a lot easier, especially women.
You just create this extraordinary sense of encroaching menace particularly in the first part of the book. It's wonderful. And I think it's an important corrective to so much of the art history that only is looking at her art and not thinking about hired assassins, gang fights, rape, incest, theft, extortion, death in childbirth, death of diseases that are now preventable. Were you expecting to discover such a sinister world?
Well, yeah, I was. I had done enough research to kind of know. And I think, though, that it's important to note that you get used to it. And that might sound kind of weird, but and it's interesting because people that are introduced to my book and introduced to this world, people that haven't spent all this time in it, are always so shocked by the sheer amount of violence and intensity of everyday life in the Italian Renaissance and Baroque. But I'm used to it. I've been in this world so much that at this point I can understand it in a way. And I think that even now, people just adapt to living around high levels of violence. Even to this day, you get used to it because you have to. You don't have a choice. And that was Artemisia's reality. You have to do to survive.
Well, much of your book focuses on the best known incident of violence related to Artemisia's life. And this, of course, was her rape when she was 16 years old by the architectural perspective painter Agostino Tassi, a sleazy guy and a sometimes artistic collaborator of her father. We're seeing on screen now, and I don't know, Lisa, is it possible to enlarge that image and take us through it a little more? I was so moved by the sensitivity with which you presented what I would imagine would have been one of the most difficult things to draw in the whole book. And so we see this man forcing himself on the young girl. She's resisting. But rather than give the viewer a scene of the incident itself, you leave it to our imaginations. When they walk through that door, he's being incredibly cruel, and it's so much more poignant because we, the viewer, can imagine what's happening there, but we aren't participating in her humiliation. I thought that was just an extraordinary artistic solution to that. Was that your idea from the beginning? How did you arrive at this?
This, and the dialogue here, you can see is in lowercase. This is all her words. So my goal with all of the rape stuff is just to follow her testimony as closely as possible. So what I was working with is Mary Gerard's famous translation of the trial. And it's pretty much the most complete English translation of this incredible document. And
so that's a 1989 addendum to an extraordinary monograph. And this is the book that made generations of feminist art historians care about this artist. Sorry to interject, but those of you who aren't yet a fan of that book, you'll want to add that to your library shelves too.
Yes. It was groundbreaking. It was a very groundbreaking book for sure. And we're still using it. I really used that that book, and especially that translation. Well, it's a transcription from these old documents that are hundreds of years old and then translated into English. So again, just following her words exactly. I was trying to draw exactly how she describes this happen. And this is exactly what she describes. She describes them he's walking with her around the room. He barged into the studio. All this stuff is based on her testimony. And really, I just really was just trying to stay as true to her words as possible for this.
Wow, it's incredibly powerful. And then, of course, the second part of your book goes on to address what would become an 8-month-long rape trial. You really bring to life all of this recorded testimony, not only from the plaintiffs, but from a range of witnesses, not to the event, but to the relationship between the two key people. Could you share with our listeners a little bit about the legal meaning of rape in the early 1600s and how this would have been similar to or different from what we might think of as a rape trial today?
Yeah, so first of all, there just wasn't really even a word for rape like we know it today. The closest thing to like unconsensual sex would be just considered adultery or ruining a virgin, right? So that's why in Mary Gerard's translation, she uses the word deflower instead of rape, which is like kind of ridiculous. But I did that too. I used the word deflower in my book because it's closer to the actual Italian for that time period, which so basically women were basically considered minors legally. So they were literally the property of the men in their life. They had to be chaperoned, they had to be covered, and there were these codes of honor, at that time. And it's hard for us to sort of empathize with that because in our modern world, especially in this country, is very individualistic. I am responsible for me. I am in charge of my actions and no one else. That is our way of thinking. But back in Artemisia's time, the world is like the Italian Renaissance is really, based on these family units, almost clans. And there was like really this code of honor. There were for more wealthy and upper class families, you'd have your family crest.
Right.
For men, honor is tied into your job, your profession, your guild, your status. all this stuff. But for women, honor is really just chastity. That's it for women. That's basically the main thing. And men are absolutely responsible for all the women in their life. So, and then again, it's just a very misogynist culture, very Catholic. So women's sexuality was seen as automatically suspect, automatically suspect. And, you know, this is like Eve in the original sin, right? So any kind of higher learning for women would be seen as sexual, right? And oftentimes sex workers were the only women that really could engage with men on any kind of, you know, intellectual level. So with that as the backdrop for this, you know, and then with the Counter Reformation, right? The Catholic Church really had something to prove. And so clamping down on women even harder, women in convents, right? This was part of their way to consolidate power, maintain their power, and their power was really under threat. It was starting to be more and more under threat for all these political reasons. So essentially Artemisia was seen as I know this sounds awful, but she was essentially seen as damaged goods.
Her father's goods. So it was really his case.
Yeah, so the sexual assault pretty much hindered her chances in the marriage market. And again, these concepts are difficult for us, but so I know that this is hard to wrap your mind around. But her opportunities to get married and uphold the family honor were cut down by the assault. So the only way that Agostino Tassi, this perpetrator, could make up for this would be to either marry her or pay the dowry. And the dowry was it would be a chunk of money or jewelry or goods that was paid by the father to the daughter and her new husband. You're essentially passing the daughter from one household into another. And so the money, the dowry is almost like an inheritance. It sort of guarantees her life. Dowry inflation was a huge issue as well. And we can see much later on down the road, Artemisia struggled a lot to pay dowries for her own daughters.
And dowries were really important because it was the only money the women would have discretion over after they married. It was the money they could continue to keep.
Yes. Yeah. So all this stuff was going on. And then the pages that we're pages that we're looking at are this torture device called the Sabile or the Sabille. I don't quite know how to pronounce it. So, and this was considered appropriate for Artemisia's gender and status.
And so we'll just make sure everybody who's watching understands the victim of the crime was tortured in an attempt to demonstrate that she was reporting a legitimate crime. I'm assuming the rapist's fingers were fine at the end of this process, but she was tormented.
So let's again put this into context too. Like, also the Italian judicial system at this point, you know, jail is not the punishment. You know, jail is like a holding cell, and then punishment is usually banishment or death sometimes. And torture, you know, the church was the government essentially. So authority had had torture for years and years and years to get confessions from people. And their justice system was, just like now, largely class-based, right? So Artemisia was tortured, and then Niccolo Bedino, who is a servant for Agostino Tassi, was tortured as well. But it's similar to now, where very wealthy, powerful men are not held accountable at all. So obviously Tassi is not going to be tortured, you know. it's pretty messed up. The trial is pretty amazing. So, and then here too, what's happening during the trial is there's these notaries that are writing everything that's happening. That's where the trial record comes from. And so these notaries are writing really, really fast. That's where this dialogue comes from. So again, for these scenes too, I was trying to stay as absolutely close to Artemisia's own words as possible. This is so, and again, if you go to the notes, you can see whose testimony these different scenes derive from. But a lot of it is from her own descriptions of what happened. And these words that she's saying, that it's true, this happened, I'm not lying, you know, all of this, the notaries recorded that. This is stuff, this dialogue is in lowercase. This is what the notary recorded.
And it's just around the time of this trial, shortly afterwards, that Artemisia, who she's still a very young artist, paints this extraordinary masterpiece, Judith slaying Holofernes. The first version she paints on her own in about 1612. And this is the painting that's on exhibition at the Frick Art Museum in Pittsburgh right now. One of the reasons we were so excited to have the chance to speak with you tonight. May I ask, what was it like to draw this iconic painting? Oh, here, thank you, Lisa. Now we're seeing an image of the painting itself. I'm sure you must have learned so much. What did you discover in the process of spending so much time with that painting?
Well, redrawing all the paintings was just an incredible experience, addictive, like just very meditative. When you're drawing these paintings, you know, you're really staring at them intently for hours and hours. You're really meditating on this work in a way that's just so special and just meditative, cathartic. It's so cool. And then it's also, that's how you learned back then. You would draw from the old masters and paint copies of old masters. And so that's how artists learned their craft back then, largely, was copying the old masters. So I felt like I was kind of recreating that marvelous historical process. And so it's just so cool to have that experience. And then, you know, the painting, we can tell from X-radiography that this is full of pentimenti, which is a word for when artists are making their kind of preliminary designs and drawings on the canvas. So basically, scholars and historians, you know, they're able to X-ray the painting and kind of see what's underneath. And so we can see that Artemisia really struggled with this composition.
Right. She had lots of little visual do-overs that the X-ray is showing us.
Yes. And when you really look at it and you really try to draw it yourself and really recreate it, you can see this is a very, very complex composition. This is a really complicated image. And it's just like a teenager painted this.
Right.
You know, it's like thinking about what I was doing when I was 18 or 19. I mean, it also just gives me an immense amount of respect for the Italian Renaissance. I mean, we pride ourselves in being these hard workers and all this stuff, but I feel like Artemisia was a genius. I feel like this is just, you know, she obviously was studying from her father at a really young age. And that's what artists did. You know, you picked your craft, you picked your guild, you picked your, if you were a man, you did. If you were a woman, you were basically, your choices were basically convent or marriage, you know. Although there were a lot of women artists, but you know, we can get into that later too. But really, I don't know, like just drawing this painting just gave me a lot of respect for both Artemisia and just a time in history where the fine art just had so much power and people just devoted their lives to making oil paintings. You know,
it's a remarkable painting.
Yeah, absolutely. No photography, you know, this was it. And this was magic. You know, people people didn't get to see this work. This work was at in churches or in rich people's private collections. This work was just, the painters were really doing something magical, because this stuff just has a resonance that's unlike anything else.
I think so too. Gosh, and I really hope that folks who are listening and are within driving distance of the Frick take advantage of the chance to see this exhibition. This painting is as powerful now as it was in 1612. It makes a night at home watching Netflix look boring. It is so dramatic. You could spend hours and hours looking at this and continue to see something new. It's just an exceptional work of art, which we can continue to talk about later. But I have more questions for you. Gina, as you know, and as you trace in the second half of the book, the rape trial was something of a Pyrrhic victory. Gentileschi won the case, but Agostino Tasso was able to select his choice of sentences, and he chose banishment from Rome, which he soon violated with the protection of powerful patrons. Ironically, it was the Gentileschi's who struggled to recover their reputation from this. Artemisia's father really struggled to get commissions. Eventually, he would leave Rome. And Artemisia was hurriedly married to someone she had never met, the younger brother of a family friend who had been a sort of diplomatic advisor throughout the trial. His name, this husband, Pier Antonio Stiatesi, is not someone remembered to history, and they moved to Florence. During that time, she met Galileo Galilei, who would play a role in making her the first woman to be accepted into the Accademia del Disegno. Galileo, pretty remarkable. Do you see any evidence of his thinking when you look at her art?
Not exactly. And I think Galileo was one of a lot of powerful men that got behind Artemisia. And there's more evidence of Galileo's relationship with Orazio, Artemisia's father. And I talk about this in the notes of the book. We don't know exactly how Artemisia got into the academy, but she did need a lot of powerful men, and even her father, to sign for her. So, I think, and I think you didn't, art functioned differently back then too. You couldn't just paint what you wanted. You had to paint either religious material or ancient history or still life, and portraiture were considered sort of lower on the scale. And we know that that Galileo was a huge art fan, and you can kind of see that, you can kind of trace, when you really delve into the history, you can kind of trace these sort of circles of different artists and creators and intellectuals, kind of like now, you can kind of see there's certain groups of artists and thinkers connecting with each other and sharing ideas. So we can kind of see that in Artemisia's time too, largely based off of letters that artists were writing to each other, but then also just art historians and social historians trying to put together these lives. So we can kind of see Artemisia moving in some of the same circles as Galileo. So it's a little less like, hey, that looks like something that Galileo mentioned in one of the paintings. But there is some of that, right? Scholars are constantly debating about that stuff nonstop, all over the place, all the time. But it's more like, we can see that Galileo was in Rome, when Artemisia was just getting started. He was there setting up the Lincei Academy, which is his science academy. So it's like they might have met there. We know that Galileo had written that he was friends or respected Orazio, Artemisia's father's work. And then we can see too that maybe Artemisia had a connection with him in Venice, like was hanging out around Padua with some of the same sorts of scholars and intellectuals that maybe had knew Galileo. And then she wrote a letter to him in 1635 later, where she kind of refers to them as friends. She kind of makes it seem like they've been friends, but she's also trying to get him to help her. Like it was a letter that was like, hey, can you help connect this painting with this rich patron? Can you help me, you know? So a lot of these relationships are sort of speculative in that way.
Right.
But that's also how a lot of like minorities art history is, because it's just hard to piece together the information. And then anyone who's not like a straight wealthy white man, it's going to be harder to find information about them, because most of the, you know, most women couldn't read or write, you know. So I feel like there's an element of conjecture that's just always present when women and people of color like try to piece together these histories, because it's harder to find information about us
True.
for all these social political reasons. So yeah, you know, you're just trying to piece together these communities, these relationships that people had, you know. So all kinds of factors go into that.
You paint such a vivid picture of these years she spent in Florence, where things don't go well. Artemisia and her new husband run into debt, and they're run out of town. Their belongings have been seized. At this incredibly low point, her young son dies, and this is the third of the 4 children she's had at this point in her life. And we're looking here at a double-page spread from the book that shows the despair of this grieving young mother who's just lost her child. Could you talk to us about developing these incredibly powerful images?
Yeah, so this was another one where I was trying to stay as close to the words as possible. And in this case, it's a lot of this is based off of a handful of letters that were discovered around 1620. And these letters were letters written mostly from Artemisia and her husband Pier Antonio to Francesco Maria Maringhi. And Maringhi was Artemisia's lover. She never married him. They couldn't because Artemisia was already married. So this triangle scandal, I mean, major
So
scandal.
awkward.
So so there's this handful of letters from this time period that is between this triangle between Artemisia and her husband and this new lover. The new lover, Maringhi, he had connections to the Medici. He was wealthy. He had so much going for him in all these ways. He was helping Artemisia get in with the Medici. It was a huge deal. I mean, the Medici were like
Absolutely
the ones you want to get in with. Cosimo too was the head honcho of Florence. He was also dying of tuberculosis at the time. So there's this scandalous triangle, and so at this point scholars are mostly thinking that that's the main reason why Artemisia and her husband had to leave Florence, and that it was less financially motivated.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously money played a part in this. Artemisia was hustling, trying to get patronage, as we all do even now. You know, but a lot of that struggle for patronage and debt, right, a lot of that might have actually been pretty common. So likely she was mostly leaving Rome due to probably Cosimo II found out that this painter who's been painting for him is actually adulterous. Huge scandal. So they had to get out of there, and it also looks like Cosimo confiscated all of their things as a result of this. then in the middle of all of this, of course, she loses her children, and it's awful, but also the context, right? Very common. Like half of all kids just didn't make it in that time period. And that's just, again, the reality of that time. But here's what's also amazing. Like, I had this whole sequence drawn, but then when this new batch of letters from this time period was brought to light by Francesco Salinas, as I started learning more and more about this new cache of letters, I was like, oh man, this is amazing. And it has not been totally translated into English, but these letters started becoming more and more accessible. Social historian Elizabeth Cohen did an essay where she published excerpts of the letters in English. So that's where I got the dialogue for Artemisia's like horrible breakdown. They come from those letters, Pier Antonio being like, she's really messed up. Like, we can't get through to her. Like, she's having a meltdown. Like, she's not. And it like,
so this is the husband writing to the lover about the woman at the center of the love triangle, describing her
and
utter despair.
And we get her own words about how horrible it was for her to lose her son. And it's amazing because a lot of scholars thought, well, since it was so common for kids to die, she would not have felt the grief in the same way that we would now, right? Same thing with the rape. It was like, well, there wasn't even really a word for rape. It didn't really exist back then. So women didn't really mind it, right? Like that was seriously like an attitude within the scholarly world. So then you get these letters and we're looking at Artemisia herself being like, I don't know how I'm gonna live without my son, just so, there's all this controversy about the history, but there are all these really deep things that women feel, that transcend time and that are timeless, essentially.
Absolutely. Well, and it's so extraordinary that as she begins to process this grief and start to recover, one of the projects she throws herself into is painting another version of Judith slaying Holofernes, this time for the Medici. And here we are looking at a page in the book in which you reproduce this version. Tell us about this. How does this version of the painting differ from the one that we were looking at earlier?
So the second one, at the surface level, it looks pretty similar. It is basically this kind of the same composition, although is a little zoomed out. And actually the earlier Judith, which is the one on display at the Frick,
we have on view, right?
Yeah, that one, it's been said, was actually cut a little bit.
It probably was cut down, which is why it's slightly asymmetrical. You lose the very edge of Holofernes' legs.
Yeah, so there is the possibility that earlier one actually was a little bigger. Although this composition, she's really done it so that the sword is in the center too. And then also with this one, Judith is a little older. She's put on a little weight, and then she's also wearing all this glorious jewelry. So the second version here of this kind of same or similar composition definitely has more of a Medici theater Florence vibe to it, because that's where Artemisia had been. So it does have that. It has, a little more of that, again, theater to it. Theater and glamour. She's got the bracelet. She's got, and also, it's also just bloodier. The blood is spurting in this one. It is like sprang onto her dress. She doesn't even care. So I don't know. It's tempting to read autobiography into these paintings, and that's part of the dialogue about the ongoing debate about Artemisia and Judith and all of this, and it almost seems like this is something she's coming back to under great duress or stress. like maybe it has less to do with like the rape exactly, and just like something that she's coming back to just harness this power is what it looks like.
Trauma and
But
pain
yeah, but
returning.
also you can see from this page here, the way I've set it up, the Medici women were like not into this.
Not pleased.
They
Not
so
decorous.
basically Cosimo II, the head honcho that this was painted for, he passed away of tuberculosis. And so his mother there on the left, Christine of Lorraine, and his wife, Maria Maddalena there on the right, they sort of took over, and the women regents ran Florence for a significant amount of time before the heir would come of age. So they had a considerable amount of power, these women, and they were pretty progressive in some ways. These very powerful women were arranging marriages for the women in their court. They were often trying to give women a little more power and control over who they would marry. They were trying to like at least set the women of the court up with dudes that weren't too bad. They stepped in and helped women who were going through domestic violence. So I would say that these women regents were, pretty feminist, right? And a whole conversation about proto-feminism could happen for a different talk some other day. But even still, despite them being powerful women regents, there's evidence that they were not super thrilled about Artemisia's crazy bloodbath Judith. So there on the bottom left corner, you can see the Judith there that Maria Maddalena commissioned. That's a very different Judith. That's like, she's heroic, she's holding the sword up. Honestly, and we'll talk about this more later, this almost looks more similar to a composition like Kehinde Wiley's, right? Where we're just holding the head up triumphantly, or it's less about it's more decorative. It's less about like just the action.
It's so true. Well, there's so much more in the book that readers will discover. I just wanted to touch on one more extraordinary episode. As Artemisia continues to follow opportunities for patronage, and at this point, she's separated from Pier Antonio. She's a single mother, and she's raising 2 daughters. Her travels take her to England and Naples. Readers will discover as they delve into the book that she lives through an extraordinary political uprising, a volcanic eruption. We don't have time for all of that tonight, but one of the most moving passages concerns her reunion with her father, who at this time is quite an old man working in England. Can you speak to us a little about that reunion and share with us your take on this incredibly complicated father-daughter relationship?
Yeah, I mean, well, a lot of it, again, is speculative, right? And especially Artemisia's trip to London, it's almost kind of her most mysterious phase in a lot of ways. Like, there's a lot that we don't know. That being said, I mean, that handful of letters from 1620 that I was just talking about, those letters also reveal some pretty intense friction between Artemisia and her father and brothers. Probably even physical violence between
her brothers are so mean.
The brothers are like, it's interesting. Yeah, like her brothers were essentially working for her father and for Artemisia. Her brothers were sort of like art handlers or art dealers for them. Her brothers were traveling around with the paintings, delivering the paintings, traveling during an incredibly dangerous time period, and traveling on horseback and traveling on ships and traveling, in all these ways. So the brothers are pretty interesting. They got into a lot of trouble in England too for this handful of Catholic painters to go up there and paint for Charles I in England. They were outsiders. They were this was like gearing up to the English Civil War. So Orazio was absolutely an outsider. He was painting for the Catholic Queen Henrietta Maria, who was very controversial. The Protestant English scene, was very skeptical of Henrietta Maria. And then the exiled French Catholic Queen, Marie de Medici, she was there as well. So, some people have to wonder, were these women like part of a Catholic conspiracy to try and swing things more Catholic? There's a little bit of evidence that Orazio might have been involved in some of that. So that could be one thing that brought Artemisia up there, not just her father. So, but like, she had to have got up there for her father too. And I think in a lot of ways she kind of eclipsed him, and I think, again, the rape and all of that much harder on him, because again, he owned, Artemisia's father and brothers, they were considered responsible for her. Absolutely. So they were pissed. They were pissed at her. They were pissed at her for having the affair in Florence. That would have been unthinkable to them, that she would do that to them. So obviously it's a rocky relationship, but also Orazio had this enormous commission for the huge ceiling fresco that was moved to Marlborough House. But it was originally in the Queen's House in Greenwich. It was an enormous ceiling fresco. Right. And there was no way that the elderly Orazio could possibly pull that off on his own. And probably his sons were assistants and helped him. But probably Artemisia went up there and helped as well. And we don't know exactly in what capacity she helped and exactly when she was there. But probably she went to help with that painting as well.
And may we zoom in a little bit, Lisa, because I love the first image on this page. And then because that distance between them is so poignant, they're so evenly matched. We see the change in her stature. She's an adult. She's come into her own. He's clearly an old man at this point. It's remarkable the compassion and real affection that we're seeing here. It takes you back to the earliest pages of the book when they're painting together, which is so beautiful before the rape and the trial pull them apart and create a psychological distance between them. And then, Lisa, may we go to the next slide? I just love these. Can we go in close to the top half of the page first? So many of us, I think, will recognize that wonderful self-portrait that Artemisia painted that remains in England, that's depicted in the center panel. But look at those two wonderful images on the right of her father looking at that. Those are some of my absolute favorite images in the whole book. I just think those are superb. They speak volumes.
Yeah, I mean, she hadn't seen him in 15 years. Again, it's not like you can just jump on a plane right like now. It was a huge, it probably, we don't know the exact route that she got there, but it was probably on multiple ships. It took weeks and weeks for her to get there. And then to go to this climate where, frankly, if you're an Italian Catholic, you're probably not going to be welcome. I mean, it was a huge deal for her to go up there. And then here's that huge ceiling piece that I mentioned earlier.
Yes.
And this is just my recreation of it with ballpoint pen, but the actual thing is, this is an enormous ceiling piece. Actually, I mentioned that it was, is it frescoed? Gosh, I should know this. No, I think it's just multiple paintings.
I think it's canvas applied to the ceiling.
Yeah, so it's not frescoed. That's right, because Artemisia didn't do fresco. What am I talking about? She didn't do fresco. So it's basically just, I think it's like 7 paintings, like all on the ceiling. And if I remember correctly, it's not in the best shape. Like it hasn't been restored, I don't think. So it's not, and it was moved. And then all of this work was really, it's amazing that it survived the Civil War. A lot of the Catholic work was destroyed in England during the uprising, where Charles I was killed and all of that political stuff. So it's amazing that it's still here.
Well, I'm seeing that we're just at time, so I'm going to ask one final question and open it up to questions from the viewers who are joining us tonight. Of course, the Frick currently has on view the first version of the subject that we believe Artemisia painted on her own. Her father may have helped, but this is really her painting from about 1612, alongside an extraordinary depiction of Judith holding the severed head of Holofernes by the contemporary American artist Kehinde Wiley. Having spent so much time with the earlier image, Gina, I'd love to hear what you see when you look at the contemporary painting.
Well, I think like the biggest, obviously these two paintings were created in completely different contexts. And I think the big thing that really stands out is that Artemisia is just so heavily influenced by Caravaggio. And, you know, she gets compared to him a lot, and people are certainly like not as into her, not as into his Judith at this point as hers. But she could not have done this painting without Caravaggio's influence. And whereas I think, you know, Kehinde Wiley has got, again, his composition almost is more, is almost more like classical. It seems to be more, you know, sort of decorative symbolism, as opposed to like Artemisia's like action and theater, you know. But I think despite these differences, you know, both of these artists are really questioning power. They're really questioning who's in charge. They're really making us think about power dynamics. And they're both relying on the archetype of Judith, right? Judith was a symbol for the weak overcoming the strong, similar to David and Goliath, you know. And so I think both of these artists are really using this archetype for this message. And you know, if you look at just like the faces of Judith and both of the Judiths, there's something pretty powerful and determined and pissed off about both of these faces. Both of these paintings were created by minorities within the white, straight, Western art history world. And both of them are trying to like subvert the expectation of what's appropriate for them to be doing. And as minorities in this world, artists of color and queer artists and women artists, we're always making work with this idea that we kind of have to prove ourselves and prove who we are. And we're constantly bumping up against the expectations of us. And then just in my first reaction to these two paintings, both Artemisia and Kehinde Wiley have really used fashion and fabric and these sort of floral garments and patterns in their work a lot. And there's this concept of self-fashioning, where artists are really building up who they are. And this is especially huge for us minorities that really have to work in a lot of ways even harder to just kind of prove ourselves. And so maybe not this particular Judith as much, maybe even the later Judith kind of reminds me of Kehinde Wiley's work even more, just her, the sort of patterns and floral fabrics and rich golds that Artemisia would use kind of reminds me of some of Kehinde Wiley's work as well. And then both of these artists were using big workshops. When Artemisia was doing this earlier, Judith, not so much, because she was mostly probably alone. She was just getting her career started. But later on, especially in Naples, she was working with lots of assistants in a big workshop setting. And that's also what Kehinde Wiley has done. And also, it's the use of models and common people for models that we're seeing in both of these paintings as well. And in Artemisia's time, that was pretty common. You know, a lot of models were regular people that you could find and pay to sit for paintings. A lot of times they were sex workers, and a lot of times models were sort of lower down on the status rung. And you know, Kehinde Wiley's is setting up these workshops with regular models, and he's interacting with these women that a lot of them have not had opportunities like this before. And so there's really, you can see that these fine artists are really making these detailed recreations of these common people, these people that were models. So there's that too.
Almost as if each of the artists is saying, why not us?
Right. Yes.
Well,
Do I have more time? I mean, I can just go and go, but maybe we're done. I mean, there's so much that I could go on and on about, but probably that's it.
I wish we could go on forever and ever. Do you want to, is there something that you want to say before we go? If anyone has a last minute question, you can throw it in the chat, and we could answer one more question. But well, I have it. There's a question in Q&A. Hello, Kalolo. Kalolo Luckett, Gina, is our consulting curator on this show. She just did a program for us last week. And her question, or her comment and question is, this is a wonderful conversation, Gina. It's fascinating to see the depiction of Artemisia through the lens of graphic novel. What decisions went into drawing Artemisia the way you did stylistically?
I was really looking at the paintings, and we don't know who these models were that Artemisia is painting. And again, there's a huge scholarly debate about that, but I won't get into that. But probably she was painting herself, like in some cases, and perhaps even in a fair amount of cases, especially early on. So, and then we do have a couple portraits of her that other artists did throughout her life. So I was going by those and just trying to make her look as much like I thought she actually looked, and really looking at her paintings of herself and other people's paintings of her. And I also wanted to make her age. I wanted to have an older woman actually look older, which just doesn't happen enough in our society at all. So that was part of it too, is just like actually trying to, you know, have an older woman at the forefront and on the cover, even a woman over 40. That just doesn't happen very much in the media, certainly not in comics. So that was part of it too.
Thank you for that. Well, I would like to end, Lizzie, if you're okay with it, on with a comment that someone posted about a half an hour ago. Someone named Barry, who said to Gina, "The authority of your scholarship and artistry paired with the confidence and clarity of your voice is thrilling to behold on this webcast. Brava." And I would,
hear.
Yeah, hear to that. So I think that's a perfect summary of what it is to be in conversation with you and learn from you, and just to see how you honored this topic and this woman is really admirable to me, and I think has inspired a lot of people just to hear today. So we wish you success with this book, and it is in our gift shop. You can order it. You can come in. You can email me. You can email Lizzie. We will get you copies. We will do anything we can, Gina, for you to continue to educate people. I think you're just a natural. So Sorry, Lizzie, I had to gush a bit, and also
I'm glad that you did.
Your conversation was wonderful. So thank you to both of you. Did you want to say one more thing?
I was just going to say that people can get a hold of me through Fantagraphics if they need to, if they have questions for me. I'm not on social media, but people can reach me through Fantagraphics if they need to.
I just put it's Fanta Graphics.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah, in the chat. That's FANTA Graphics. And you can go to their website to get in touch with Gina.
Thank you, Gina. Your book has such
guys.
integrity, and it was such a pleasure to speak with you.
Thank you, guys. Thank you so much. Sorry, I kind of went on and on over the questions.
We need more of this.
We loved it.
We need more of this going on and on, truly. So,
yay, thank you.
We'll see you again for your next book.
Yes, we will.
Yeah, sounds good.
And thank you to everyone for being with us today. Like I said at the beginning, I feel like we all got lucky here. So thanks for being with us, and please come see these beautiful works. They're not to be missed. Cool. So thank you everyone. And you can find this recording. It will be on the Frick's YouTube page, so you can watch it again and get in there for the details. So thanks again. Have a good night, everyone.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Bye. Thank you, Gina. Thank you, Lizzie.
Thanks.
Bye.